It's been a long time coming, but the full-length animated pilot for Lackadaisy is finally here, and thankfully, it's getting the recognition that it rightfully earned. It is abundantly clear that this project had so much hard work and passion put into it, which is why I second-guessed myself multiple times before writing this review. I already know this is going to be my most disliked video, but know that all my criticism is not me attacking the show or its creators, but simply voicing my thoughts. I'm glad it's so popular, and I hope that the positive reception they are getting is going to allow them to continue the project. I also want to say that I have only heard of Lackadaisy one time before this came out, so I don't know any of the history or lore for this web series. This is all coming from someone who had absolutely no expectations whatsoever outside of me being excited about a new web animation. Here we go. I'm going to begin with a summary of the episode, so if you already have watched it, I encourage you to skip to the time being displayed on the screen now. The episode begins with a cat named Rocky performing on a bridge, while two other cats named Freckle and Ivy are digging up a grave. Inside the coffin, they find bottles of whiskey and load them into the trunk of their car. Before they are able to leave, another car of three other cats named Seraphine, Nicodeme, and Mordecai? I don't know if I pronounced that. I don't even know that. I've never seen those names before in my life. They begin to fire at them, and we quickly transition to a car chase. Rocky tells Freckle to fire back, but he is very hesitant to. The attackers begin to gain on them and begin to damage the trunk with the whiskey inside, but suddenly a crazed Freckle fires out of the back of their car, popping the back tire and leaving them behind. Rocky steers their car off-road into a mining quarry, crashing through a wall and putting their vehicle out of commission. Rocky leaves the car laughing to himself and searches around the quarry, eventually finding the demolitions depot. Ivy asks if Freckle is okay, and he begins to calm down from his crazed state and apologizes to Ivy. Seraphine, Nicodeme, and Mordecai arrive to the quarry and begin to open fire on Freckle and Ivy. Freckle tells Ivy to stay put and work on repairing the car while he lures them away. Mordecai chases after Freckle, and Seraphina, along with I don't know. I have no idea what... He begins to close in on Ivy. Mordecai and Freckle get into a shootout, ending with Freckle's loss. Before Mordecai executes Freckle and Seraphina and Nicodema catch Ivy, Rocky comes to the rescue riding a mining machine, throwing sticks of dynamite. He blows up the water tower, flooding the quarry, giving Ivy enough time to repair their car, and all three of them escape. They arrive at a speakeasy called the Lackadaisy to deliver the whiskey. The owner, Mitzi, is disappointed with the product they bring in since most of it was destroyed during the car chase, but is still grateful to Rocky and his crew. The episode ends with Rocky getting on stage and playing music for everyone while Freckle and Ivy dance together. Let's get this out of the way. This show is gorgeous. It has that classic animation style that looks all like it was hand-drawn, with character outlines sometimes flashing into view, giving it a unique charm that not many other shows have. The opening to the episode alone is some of the most beautiful animation I have seen in a long time, and is just marinated in a tasteful, classy style. Not to mention that this all takes place during the Prohibition era, which is not only an underappreciated setting, but its aesthetic is very pleasing, whether it be the cars, the buildings, or the clothes. We don't see animations like this anymore, and I can't even imagine the amount of time and effort it took to not only make what I would call art, but then animating it into a full-length episode. And that's why it's with a heavy heart that I have to say that is where most of my praise for the episode ends. Most pilots are more like proof of concepts rather than true episodes, so this episode more or less focused on characters and world building instead of a plot to be invested in. I want to say the show is going to be about alcohol smuggling, but it's too early to tell. For all I know, it could go the way of Helluva Boss, where we were given a simple concept, but down the road changes its focus into something else entirely. Usually this wouldn't bother me that much, but on top of the lack of plot details, it's kind of hard to pinpoint what genre this show actually is. Since it's not a comedy, it doesn't seem serious enough to be a noir, and action doesn't seem to be the focus. This lack of concrete direction makes it hard to pinpoint who this show is for outside of the already existing fanbase. If you were tasked with describing the show to someone, what would you say outside of it taking place during the Prohibition and everyone is a cat? Speaking of which, this pilot is filled with characters, with our leading trio being made up of Rocky, Freckle, and Ivy. Rocky is a suave musician who doesn't really contribute to the group outside of motivating and calming down others, and being a wild card when he needs to be. He presents himself as pretty selfish, but not really mean-spirited, just kind of inconsiderate. I would say he's a pretty average character, that is until he becomes a delusional lunatic later in the episode. Out of nowhere, Rocky starts to go manic, hallucinating and becoming a straight-up arsonist. This character's trait really comes out of nowhere and would have felt a lot less jarring if there was a scene earlier in the episode that hinted at him being mentally unstable. But there wasn't, so Rocky's personality changing so suddenly both confused me and took me out of the show. Freckle is Rocky's much more grounded cousin. He seems to do more of the heavy lifting for the team, picking up the slack for Rocky's inactivity. But just like Rocky, he has a crazed part of him completely switching from a pacifist to a violent maniac in nearly an instant after he's handed a gun. Unlike Rocky though, there is an audio cue warning that there's something wrong with him, and there's a line afterward that I think is supposed to acknowledge this part of his personality, which he is seemingly trying to bury. He also might have a crush on Ivy, which adds an intriguing dynamic when paired with him being ashamed of a part of his personality. Ivy is the optimistic support of the crew, whose main task in this episode is maintaining and driving their car. She's the odd one out, being the youngest, and since she isn't really related to either of them, she seems a bit more distant from the two, but is still openly friendly enough. Rocky has that charismatic presence that makes him just the center of the attention. Freckle is the nervous, rational foil of Rocky, and Ivy just kind of fills in any dead air, having the least presence of the trio. In opposition to them, we have Serafina, Nicodemus, and Mordecai. Serafina and Nicodemus are siblings who are carefree and bloodthirsty. They are pretty standard thug characters that we know very little about, but pose enough of a threat to not feel like pushovers, and are more than likely going to be reoccurring minor antagonists throughout the series. To round out the trio is Mordecai, who from the very first time we see him, carries an air of importance to him. He does not fit in with Nicodemus and Serafina at all, being cool, collected, and all business. He is the most interesting character in the pilot, not only due to his mysterious, solemn demeanor, but also because there are hints that he has a backstory that intertwines with the main cast. This trio is carried by Mordecai, with Serafina and Nicodemus feeling like they're only there to shoot things and have very little character outside of that. None of them seem especially cruel or evil though, so I'm sure when a bigger threat comes along, they will transition from being antagonists to minor supporting characters. We also have a sizable handful of additional characters introduced to us in the second half of the episode. There is Zib, who is one of the main musicians for the Speakeasy, Wick, who is a mannered politician, Victor, who is the angry Russian who has been recently appointed as the bartender, and Mitzi, the owner of the Speakeasy. Each of these characters gets a handful of lines, but only one worth mentioning is Mitzi. She is soft-hearted and caring, but is struggling to keep the Speakeasy even open, and her way to cope is talking to paintings of who I think is her dead father? The sheer amount of unique characters that are introduced in this pilot makes the world feel populated and lived in, but this comes at the cost of most of these characters not having enough scenes to leave a lasting impression, making a lot of them just seem uninteresting. The only characters that left a lasting impression are the main trio and Mordecai, and I gotta say, the impression they left was just interesting enough to not be forgettable. I'm having a really hard time connecting with these characters, with Rocky feeling like he was written with the main goal of being a main character, which only leads to there being too many attributes stuffed into his character, and making his quirks and interests feel forced. Freckle's a slight improvement over Rocky, but the nervous, overly cautious personality is really starting to feel overdone. As for Ivy, she is only memorable because she seems to be the only character who seems to be enjoying herself and not being deranged in some way. Mordecai is easily the best of them all, be it his character design, his standout moments, or him creating anticipation for the viewers with hints of his backstory. But you know what really did this pilot in for me? What major oversight was made that I didn't notice my first time watching, but became obvious the more I watched it? The lack of background music. Background music is a pivotal part of every show and movie. It's what adds emotion and helps get viewers invested. If you want to make a scene sad, you add sad music. If you want to make a scene suspenseful, you add suspenseful music. So on and so forth. This isn't necessarily true in every case, since there are scenes that are accentuated by the lack of music, but that's only because the rest of the project typically has music in it. Just having simple background music can add ambiance, make scenes feel less awkward, and make it so it doesn't feel like you're just watching characters reading a script. The car chase scene attempts this and gets very close to succeeding, but the music is just too drowned out for it to reach the impact it was going for. In case you don't believe me, I actually made an entire video adding background music to a handful of scenes in the episode to prove my point. The link to it will be pinned in the comment section. What makes this problem so irritating is that this project has been in production for a long time, yet this is such an obvious oversight. And that's all I have to say. There doesn't seem to be much more to acknowledge just because there isn't much more to the pilot to talk about. I agree with everyone else that the animation and art style is unparalleled as far as web series go, but what else does this pilot actually do well? I can understand my personal taste in the characters is a subjective one, so if they are the strong suit for the episode, maybe this series just simply isn't for me. And it's not like there's too much of a plot, it's just a heist-esque job that went awry. There's a possibility that this pilot was made solely for already existing fans, but when you put so much work into a project, wouldn't you want to make sure it can be enjoyed by everyone? Trust me, I really tried to like it. I watched the pilot multiple times hoping it would grow on me, but every time it just felt like a chore to get through, and I was enjoying myself less and less each time. I do still encourage you though to give the pilot a like if you haven't already, because even though I don't think it's deserved, it's most certainly earned, and only good things can come from web animations getting a lot of attention so that big companies out there know that the animation industry is still worth investing in. Lackadaisy has my full respect and admiration, but I just can't say that I'm not disappointed.
Man, don't fake laugh.
Huh?
That's not real. I could tell.